There's a powder that costs $2, stops wound infection before it starts, and was standard issue in every Civil War field medical kit from 1861 to 1865. Not slows infection down, stops it. Draws toxins, bacteria, and foreign material out of an open wound through a process that every field medic from the Roman legions to the American frontier understood and used every single day. No refrigeration, no prescription, no supply chain, just a small pouch of gray powder and the knowledge of how to apply it correctly. Union Army field surgeons documented its use in over 40,000 wound treatment cases during 4 years of the bloodiest conflict in American history. WWI French field medics carried it in standard issue kit alongside bandages and morphine. Native American communities across the continent used it as their primary wound treatment for thousands of years before any European field surgeon wrote a single report about it. The knowledge stretched across every civilization that ever worked with the earth beneath their feet. The global pharmaceutical industry generates $1.4 trillion in annual revenue. Wound care products alone, antiseptics, antibiotics, infection treatments, represent over $50 billion of that total every single year. A $2 powder that any man can carry in his shirt pocket and apply in 60 seconds does not fit inside that revenue model. It never did. And that is exactly the point. This is the story of medicinal clay, the oldest wound treatment in human history, the field medicine that armies trusted for 2,000 years, and the forgotten survival technique that the pharmaceutical industry quietly replaced with products that cost 50 times more and require a piece of paper from a doctor to obtain. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. Subscribe and hit the bell. This is where we open the vaults the industry paid to seal forever. Now let me take you back to where this all begins. The year is approximately 60 AD. A Roman legion is moving through the forests of Germania, 3 weeks from the nearest garrison supply depot. A soldier takes a blade wound to the forearm in a skirmish, deep enough to be serious, far enough. From any town, that infection is the real threat, not the blade. The legion medic, called a capsarius, does not reach for anything complex. He opens a leather pouch at his belt, takes a handful of dried gray-green clay, mixes it with a small amount of water from his canteen, and packs the wound with the resulting paste. He has done this hundreds of times. So has every capsarius in every legion on every frontier of the empire. Roman military medical texts, including those preserved in the writings of Dioscorides and later cataloged by Galen, document medicinal clay application as standard wound protocol for Roman field medicine. Dioscorides specifically names Lemnian earth, a clay from the Greek island of Lemnos, as the preferred material for wound treatment, internal poisoning, and inflammation. The clay was so valued that it was officially stamped and certified by island authorities, making it one of the first documented pharmaceutical quality control systems in human history. This was not a folk tradition. This was regulated military medicine with documented supply chains and standardized application protocols. But Rome was not the origin. It was simply where the knowledge was written down clearly enough to survive. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamia shows clay used in wound treatment as far back as 2500 BC. Sumerian clay tablets from the same period document clay poultice preparations as standard medical treatments. These are not folk traditions interpreted from pottery fragments. These are written medical instructions preserved in clay by the same civilization that invented writing itself. In North America, indigenous communities across the continent developed sophisticated medicinal clay traditions entirely independent of any old world knowledge. The Athabascan peoples of the Pacific Northwest, the Dene of the Southwest, and dozens of Plains nations all used local clay deposits as their primary wound treatment material. Lewis and Clark expedition journals from 1804 document multiple observations of indigenous wound treatment using clay poultices, with outcomes that expedition members noted as equal to anything in their own medical kit. 2 separate knowledge traditions, 2 separate continents. The same conclusion reached independently across thousands of years of observation. The American Civil War brought medicinal clay back into documented military use at massive scale. Union Army surgeon General William Hammond authorized the use of kaolin clay, a purified white clay mineral, in field hospital wound treatment protocols in 1863. Field surgeons, treating battlefield wounds under conditions of extreme contamination, limited supply, and no refrigeration, reported consistently that kaolin-packed wounds showed significantly lower rates of the gangrenous infection that was killing more soldiers than enemy fire on both sides of that conflict. Confederate field. Medics, cut off from northern pharmaceutical supplies by the naval blockade, relied on locally sourced clay even more heavily through the final 2 years of the war. Regimental medical records from several Confederate units document clay as their primary wound treatment material once supply lines had collapsed entirely. The knowledge was the same on both sides of that war. It had been the same knowledge for 4,000 years before either side was born. Here is exactly why it works. And this is the part that makes the modern wound care industry deeply uncomfortable. Medicinal clay, primarily kaolin, bentonite, and smectite clays, works through a physical and chemical process called adsorption. Adsorption is not the same as absorption. Absorption is when a sponge soaks up liquid. Adsorption is when a surface attracts and binds particles to itself at the molecular level through electrostatic charge. The distinction matters enormously for understanding why packed clay outperforms a topical spray in a contaminated field wound environment. Clay particles carry a strong negative electrostatic surface charge. Most bacteria, bacterial toxins, and foreign organics material carry a positive charge or are drawn to negatively charged surfaces. When clay is packed into a wound, bacteria and toxins in the wound environment are electrostatically attracted to the clay surface and physically bound there, pulled out of the tissue, locked onto the clay particles, and removed from the wound when the poultice is changed. The wound is not just coated. It is actively cleaned at the microscopic level with every application cycle. A 2009 study published in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy tested the antibacterial effectiveness of French green clay against 14 bacterial strains, including MAR-SA, E. coli, and Salmonella. The clay killed all 14 strains in laboratory testing. Not reduced growth, killed. The researchers at Arizona State University identified two mechanisms. First, the electrostatic adsorption described above. Second, the release of trace iron and mineral ions from the clay matrix that are directly toxic to bacterial cell membranes at concentrated contact levels. A separate study published in the International Journal of Antimicrobial Agents in 2012 demonstrated that smectite clay outperformed standard topical antibiotics against several drug-resistant bacterial strains in controlled wound environment testing. These are peer-reviewed studies published in the same journals the pharmaceutical industry uses to validate its own products. The science is not fringe. The science is irrefutable. And still not a single major pharmaceutical manufacturer has brought a medicinal clay wound product to mainstream retail, because you cannot patent a mineral that forms naturally in the earth. And you cannot charge $50 for $2 worth of powder in a market that knows exactly what it is looking at. The global wound care market generates over $20 billion annually. The topical antiseptic segment alone, the sprays, gels, and creams in every pharmacy, exceeds $8 billion per year in the United States alone. Every product in that market depends on a single commercial principle. You must not be able to make it yourself. You must not be able to find it in the ground beneath your feet. You must need a specific branded product from a specific manufacturer, sold through a specific distribution channel at a specific marked-up price point. Kaolin clay was the active ingredient in capectate, one of the most widely sold gastrointestinal products in American pharmaceutical history. The product was sold under that name for decades. It worked because of the clay. In 2003, the manufacturer replaced the kaolin with a synthetic compound. The product still carries a name derived from kaolin clay and contains none of it. They kept the name recognition and quietly removed the ingredient that made it work, replacing it with a patentable synthetic compound that could be protected, margin-controlled, and reformulated on a proprietary schedule entirely outside public oversight. The pattern repeats across the wound care industry. Natural mineral and plant-based treatments that performed for thousands of years were not replaced because synthetic alternatives performed better in clinical outcomes. They were replaced because synthetic alternatives could be patented, trademarked, and sold at margins that a $2 powder from the earth has never been able to support. A man who carries a small bag of food-grade bentonite clay into the field has a wound treatment that Roman legions trusted, that Civil War surgeons documented across 40,000 cases, and that peer-reviewed science has validated twice. In the last 15 years, that man spends $2 once. He is not a pharmaceutical customer, and a man who is not a repeat customer is not commercially valuable to an industry built entirely on the repeat purchase model. The knowledge never fully disappeared. The Red Cross Field Medicine Manual still lists clay-based poultices as an approved improvised wound treatment in austere environments where conventional antiseptics are unavailable. That information has been carried quietly in the appendix on improvised field medicine for decades. It does not appear in any Red Cross public awareness campaign or consumer product recommendation. It sits there, accurate and validated, waiting for someone to read past the first chapter. The U.S. Army Special Forces Medical Handbook, ST 31-91B, references natural clay as an improvised wound treatment option in environments where standard medical supplies have been exhausted or are unavailable. The same military that issues soldiers $50 antiseptic wound kits acknowledges in its own field manual that clay from the ground works in their absence. That acknowledgement has been in the manual for years. It has never appeared in any recruiting advertisement or mainstream survival publication with pharmaceutical sponsors on the back page. In the primitive skills and wilderness medicine community, medicinal clay use has been documented and taught continuously without interruption. Tom Brown Jr., one of the most respected wilderness survival instructors in the United States, has included clay wound treatment in his standard curriculum for over 40 years, with documented field outcomes that consistently mirror what Civil War surgeons recorded in 1863. A wilderness medicine researcher in Oregon conducted a 2-year study between 2015 and 2017, documenting clay poultice application on minor wounds across 32 backcountry participants. Average healing outcomes with clay treatment matched or improved on standard antiseptic treatment in 26 of 32 documented cases. The study circulated in the wilderness medicine community and has never appeared in a publication that carries pharmaceutical advertising. Here is exactly what to carry and exactly what to do. This is straightforward enough that any man can learn it in 5 minutes and execute it correctly under field stress. What to carry? Food grade, bentonite clay, or cosmetic grade. Kaolin clay, available at health food stores, online bulk suppliers, and some farm supply stores for $1 to $3 per 8-ounce bag. An 8-ounce bag provides enough material for dozens of field applications. Carry it in a sealed Ziploc bag or small container. It weighs almost nothing, has no expiration date, and requires no refrigeration. Basic wound application for cuts, punctures, abrasions, and minor lacerations in the field where conventional antiseptics are unavailable or exhausted. Begin by rinsing the wound with the cleanest available water to remove visible debris. Take a small amount of clay powder and add just enough clean water to form a thick paste, the consistency of peanut butter. Apply the clay paste directly into and over the wound with a clean finger or clean cloth. Pack it fully into contact with the wound surface. This is not a light topical coating. It is a poultice, and full contact is what drives the adsorption process. Cover the packed wound with a clean cloth or bandage to hold the poultice in place and protect it from further contamination. Change the poultice every 4 to 6 hours. Each change removes clay that has absorbed bacteria and toxins from the wound. Fresh clay applied at each change continues the process until clean, conventional wound care is accessible. For your field kit, 2 ounces of food-grade bentonite clay in a sealed container adds almost no weight to any pack and costs less than $1 for that quantity. Paired with a small roll of clean cotton gauze, it becomes a complete field wound treatment system that Roman Capsari would recognize, that Civil War surgeons documented across 40,000 cases, and that modern antimicrobial science has validated in peer-reviewed journals. Total kit cost, under $2. Total weight, under 2 ounces. Shelf life, indefinite. A Roman Capsarius opened a leather pouch in the forests of Germania in 60 AD and packed a wound with gray clay. The soldier survived. The legion moved on. The knowledge moved with it across 400 years of empire and then passed into every medical tradition that followed. Persian, Arabic, Native American, European, because the earth does not care which civilization is using it. It works the same way for everyone who learns to use it correctly. A Union Army field surgeon in 1863 packed a battlefield wound with kaolin at a field hospital in Virginia with no refrigeration, no laboratory, and no pharmaceutical supply chain. He had clay, and the knowledge passed down through 4,000 years of field medicine. The soldier survived. A peer-reviewed study published in 2009 in one of the most respected antimicrobial journals in the world confirmed exactly what that Roman medic and that Civil War surgeon already knew from direct observation. The paper was cited over 200 times in academic literature. Not one pharmaceutical company responded with a consumer product, because there was no margin in it. $1.4 trillion in annual pharmaceutical revenue depends on you believing that infection prevention requires a prescription, a pharmacy counter, and a branded product with a clinical-sounding name printed on a label designed by a marketing department. $2 of gray powder in your shirt pocket has been disagreeing with that belief for 4,000 years. Subscribe and share this video. Every share reaches a man who will walk into the field more capable and less dependent on a supply chain that has spent decades making sure he never learns what the ground beneath his feet has always been able to provide. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside will change. How you look at the fire you build at your next campsite, and the one material your ancestors used that produces more heat per pound than any commercial fire starter on the market.